Twitter. Tonight, we're very happy to have back with us a good friend of the store, Mr. Michael Jarvis, and Doghead, Tales from the Neotropics. Michael Jarvis was born on an Air Force base and traveled regularly, living as a child in Guam, Georgia, and England. He graduated from Florida International University with degrees in fine arts and English. Since the mid-1980s, and beginning with the television series Miami Vice, Michael has been scouting locations for various film projects. He's also the author of the novel Field of Vision. His short story, American Kestrel, was published in The Secret of Salt, an indigenous journal, and will be included in a collection scheduled for release in 2017. He's currently at work on a new novel set in Costa Rica. Please give him a warm Books and Books welcome, Mr. Michael Jarvis.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks a lot, Steve. Thank you very much. Here I am again, 2.5 years later, my second time here. So thanks again to the nice folks at Books and Books for doing what they do for the literary community. And a special thanks to all my friends here. I appreciate the support. Thanks a lot. Also, as Steve said, this is being live streamed, so thanks to the millions of viewers watching at home or at Starbucks. I might have rounded that number up slightly, but you may have noticed. Oh, jeez. You may have noticed that there are a lot of writers around. Mainstream, independent, bloggers, spoken word contestants, rappers, retirees. It almost seems like everyone's a writer or a comedian or both. I like the deadpan delivery of Stephen Wright, who said, "I'm writing a book, I've got the page numbers done." I always like the comedians who dealt primarily with language, who examine usage and meaning and turn them inside out. George Carlin was the absolute master. Maybe you know Mitch Hedberg. He was great too, died of an overdose, some would say prematurely, but it wasn't premature at all. That's when he left. Here's one of his. "I used to do drugs. I still do, but I used to too." Again, that precise use of language. And there's probably a cautionary tale in there somewhere. Search him out. He was funny and original, and he left a mark. My point is that a writer should try to find his own original material. A lot of my work is informed or inspired by traveling, by figuring out what you want to do without much planning, so as to encounter the unexpected and make discoveries, which has been my goal, partly by going to places where I could feel lost or certainly out of my element. It's pretty dry in here, isn't it? On my first trip to Central America, I was on a bus in Guatemala with my girlfriend. We were traveling cheap, heading to Tikal, the ancient Mayan city. We stopped for a break to use the restroom and walk around. A fellow writer, a young Guatemalan dude, came up to me and we talked and hit it off. And then he pulled out a little chillum made from a palm seed, basically a pipe bowl without a stem. It was already loaded with weed, and we walked away from the bus and shared a few hits. It was a friendly meeting, and as we headed back, he gave me the bowl, which still had weed in it, as a gift. I dropped it in my shirt pocket and we rolled on. A little later, the bus was stopped at an impromptu checkpoint by some young guys with rifles. We were not in uniform, they were not in uniform, but rather wore very basic clothes, so they seemed to be some kind of homegrown militia, or maybe rebels. They boarded the bus with authority and began to examine the bags up on the racks. Then they ordered the passengers off the bus, and as we stepped down, the men and women were separated. Each group put on the opposite sides of the bus. As we parted, I told my girlfriend that everything was fine, not to worry. What else could I have said? Worry as much as possible? I don't think that helps anything. On the men's side, we were made to stand single file and place our hands against the side of the bus. it looked like the beginning of a firing squad, except why would they shoot at the bus, which was useful and had value? These amateur soldiers seemed more methodical than angry or crazy, but I was wondering what was going on with the women we couldn't see. And then my stoner buddy asked me what I'd done with the loaded bowl he had given me. I said it was in my pocket, and he said, much to my dismay, and I quote, "Oh shit." At that moment, I wanted to kill this fellow passenger for being friendly and giving me a gift, and then turning the whole brotherly encounter around into something menacing and possibly disastrous. We were all patted down in a cursory fashion, which seemed to indicate the militia boys were looking for weapons. After they had searched us and our bags, we were allowed to re-enter the bus and resume our journey. To my knowledge, nothing was missing and no physical harm had been done. But this was Guatemala in the 80s, so there was some tension. Now, you could, of course, make the point that I should never have accepted this dubious gift in the first place, or should have at least tossed it at the first opportunity. That this just made a volatile situation worse. Yes, all true. But it goes how it goes, and in the end, the extra risk heightened the encounter, the memory, and then the story. I'm not making a case for fearlessness or foolhardiness or stupidity, which often get mixed up together. What I'm talking about is finding raw material that suits you, even if you don't know it at the time. I didn't know ahead of time that the bus would be stopped at several random checkpoints, or the crossing into Mexico would be by river with Salvadoran refugees, and our hotel would be a shack on stilts beside the dark water. But all this made the adventure what it was. The destination was Tikal, but that was just a stop on a trip. I remember a time early on when I knew I would attempt to write a book, but was thinking that I didn't really have any great ideas for drama or storytelling. Basically didn't know enough to invent a world worth reading about. Traveling began to change that, opening up new worlds and possibilities. For me, it was good to wing it, to rough it, to go solo on open-ended journeys. And having an epiphany felt big, a moment of life-changing clarity. But what was more important was going to a village store and buying a common blue composition notebook and sitting down with a pen and making those first sentences that became a first paragraph. Doghead is a collection of 3 stories of varying lengths. The last one, Mojo Bite, comprising half the book. They stem from experiences and ideas gained on trips to the Caribbean and Central America, but are unrelated by character or narrative. They're held together by tropical terrain and theme, by wildness in nature, including human nature and the nature of the beast, by mythology, and by unusual life-altering obsessions undertaken by familiar people. I want to share a quote from the writer and naturalist Henry Beston, born 1888, died 1968, that speaks to me and to the stories in Doghead. The animal shall not be measured by man. In a world older and more complete than ours, they moved finished and complete, gifted with extension of the senses we have lost or never attained, living by voices we shall never hear. They are not brethren, they are not underlings, they are other nations, caught with ourselves in the net of life and time, fellow prisoners of the splendor and travail of the earth. I'll read a piece from Remnants, the middle story, and a piece from Mojo Bite. In Remnants, an American couple on a diving trip meets a fellow American who's immersed himself in a study of the Maya. He invites them to join him on a trip to the interior to visit a site of ruins near the border with Guatemala. Nancy is skeptical and finds the man, Kalal, strange and disturbing. Ben, however, is intrigued and excited to add this unexpected journey to their vacation. Reluctantly, Nancy agrees to go along. They arrive at a farm owned by a man named Pazos, who has some modest bungalows for rent. And this scene is during their first evening after dinner. Pazos has a young son, Pablo, who provided an iguana for the meal and is now cleaning up. At Kalal's suggestion, Ben is fasting to enhance his trip to the ruins, and neither man has eaten all day. Pablo filled 2 bowls from the stove and fed the dogs. For several seconds, the moon bathed the yard and the standing dogs in bright light before the gap in the clouds closed again. Pazos rinsed the iguana skin and trimmed away the ridge of spines. He stretched the skin on a board, inside up, pulling and pinning its edges, then shook a handful of salt from a box and covered the raw shape, patting the crystals into a smooth layer. Kalal poured boiling water and floating herbs through a cloth sack into cups he brought steaming to the table. Ben sat hunched over his cup, holding it loosely as the soothing heat rose to his face. After a few sips, he felt less hungry. Pazos lit a cigarette and blew smoke over the lantern. The smoke was pushed upward, caught in the column of heat rising out of the chimney. He watched the spot on the ceiling. Behind him, Pablo washed dishes in the basin. Drawing tenderly on his cigarette, thin fingers of smoke curled up over his mustache. Pazos exhaled into the light and broke the silence hanging like a vapor in the dim kitchen. At times, he cleared his throat softly, the moon is very strong here. He squinted through the smoke, not looking at any of them. The light can crack mahogany trees. He drew on his cigarette again, watching the ceiling. Frogs are touched by the light and they don't move. The next day, they are swollen by the sun. He puffed out his cheeks and his eyes moved down to meet Nancy's. She had begun to like him, though with the cigarette he looked more like a bandito than ever, and she thought now he was trying to scare her for no good reason. He turned his head to look at Ben. Tomorrow is your first trip to the ruins. That's right. Still squinting, Pazos smiled without opening his mouth, so that his mustache seemed even longer. He puffed on the cigarette once more and stubbed it out. And you arrive with a strong moon. I get lucky once in a while. He wants to have a Mayan experience, Nancy said, so he's playing follow the leader. In the short silence that followed, Ben cocked his head slightly and watched her as if she were a figure on the horizon. And that's the perfect attitude for approaching the Maya, Kalal's deep voice informed them. Isn't that why we're here? The question got their attention. The voice demanded it. And his sharp, glistening face assumed a rhetorical intensity to match, barring interruption. To understand something of their mystery? To walk in their place? He stood and backed away from the table, bending toward his companions as they were drawn forward to meet his enunciated whisper. Even for one bright moment to be them? Having taken the stage, he paused, savoring the moment, extending his arms to hold them. Imagine you're one of thousands of people gathered in the great plaza, only 2 miles from here, incidentally, and there was certainly a farm, people living right where you now sit. And like everyone, you were looking up at a temple on the top of a giant pyramid. High above you, higher even than the roof of the jungle, stands a man. He is adorned with long, beautiful feathers and heavy jade ornaments. He is one of your leaders, a priest who is about to tell you what's in store for you. Kalal held them without mercy, a stern minister of truth dragging the captured back into history. He clapped his hands sharply and began to move slowly around the table, towering over the seated listeners. You are part of a great society of astronomers, artists, builders, but you're just a regular guy, someone who grows corn or cuts limestone block. Still, you've answered the call to worship and gathered with the rest for an important occasion. You've come for the latest news, and the chances are good that it won't be great. As he walked, looking at the floor, sweat dripped off his face. Pablo stood very still at the basin, peering over his shoulder at the storyteller. because it's not easy to keep the gods on your side. There are always problems. The corn crop, your mainstay, depends on rain that's too unpredictable, and a crop failure could mean disaster. Disease and sickness could invade your community at any time, or people from outside your region could attack, steal your food, and wreak havoc on your city, where life is so delicately and beautifully balanced between harmony and danger. The low voice grew quieter, projecting sympathy, because death lurks everywhere, not only on the earth, but in the sky as well. Just look at the storms and the lightning if you need to be reminded. There's no escape from such primal and malevolent forces. He stopped and raised his hands overhead, palms upward. His hair stuck to his forehead, and the sides of his face created a dark cowl around his eyes. Your priests are astronomers who watch the heavens intensely. Buildings are constructed in relation to the sun's movement. These men track each day and name it. They give it a number. Days, events, and prophecies are recorded in folding books of bark paper using a complex hieroglyphic language. Numbers are very important in the recorded history of Maya time. So the priests check their figures often with the beads and shells of counting boxes. They know the earth travels around the sun every year, sustained by the relationship. They know the path of the moon and believe in its effect on the earth. They understand the magnitude of these celestial events and are deeply concerned with their own place in the overwhelming scheme of cosmic interactions. He began to walk again, his voice deep and resonant. They expect change and calamity. Potential disaster looms large in their observations. They worry over every solstice and every dark and dreaded eclipse. Meteor showers produce hysteria. There's nowhere to hide from such power. He paused to catch his breath, moving back and forth at the end of the room. The only hope, the only way to keep luck on their side, is to appease these forces, these gods, with a constant barrage of prayers, rituals, and offerings. Kalal turned his back to the table and stood at the doorway trembling, taking in the night air. Across the yard, crickets in the trees produced a loud, steady whirring. The dogs lay at the outskirts of the lamplight, their heads resting on the ground. Through the outer darkness, moonlight splashed onto the yard, stopping the crickets momentarily as it spread out and washed over the house. On the outside of the kitchen, black ants worked on the iguana's head, attacking the open neck and the eyes. Kalal came back to the table, speaking with fresh passion. So you've come to see your priest. He put a hand on Ben's shoulder. And you've brought an offering, though you, like many others here, have not eaten for a third day now. You honor this priest, this ruler, this astronomer, because he honors the gods for you. Even now, way up there, he's closer to them, almost in the clouds, and he's dressed like a god himself. You are not surprised by what he says or does. It isn't easy to deal directly with these fickle gods who smile while they're angry. He walked to the other end of the table, pushing his wet hair away from his face. But the ceremony you're about to witness will help keep things running smoothly. Pazos caught the attention of his son. You finished there? He asked, extending a hand. Time for bed now. The boy stood still a moment, looking at the basin, then went to his father and hugged him. He went around the table past Ben, and as he came near Nancy, she held out her hand. He touched it and then hugged her too. She held him, kissed his cheek, and whispered in his ear, "Sweet dreams." And he went quietly into the house. Kalal leaned on the table, staring at Nancy. Submission to these gods doesn't come automatically, just because they control your life. He laughed, hanging his head, and then abruptly slapped the table. You must earn submission. And the priest up there, he pointed at the ceiling behind him, demands your payment. He straightened up, rubbing a hand down his face, and stared at his wet palm. You see, it's his place, as your link to salvation, to exact the toll. He glared at the three of them in turn, and that takes some blood. It's kind of late to ask this. Can you guys hear okay? Okay. In Moho Bight, a fisherman named Reese suffers a head injury on a trip to Belize, and during the course of his recovery decides to help a woman he's met there by escorting her sick friend to her home village. The friend is bothered by an unusual ailment and feels she must return to her people to have any chance of recovery. This woman, Barbara, is Garifuna, a mixed-race people of West African and Carib Indian lineage, formerly called Black Caribs, who settled along the coast of Central America in the late 1700s. Her journey home requires a bus ride and then a boat trip because there are no roads leading to Moho Bight. The bus arrives at 7, about half full, and departs after the driver's breakfast at 7:20, with another 6 passengers boarded for journeys south. In the open compartment beside him, the driver has his tickets and logbook and newspaper and cassettes and a pistol wedged on top in plain view like an overly purposeful paperweight that, along with his brusque and authoritarian manner, and perhaps to the hour, seems to establish for a time a non-communicative air within the moving vehicle. Hanging in the open doorway, the young second, already adopting the ways of his superior, watches the passengers and the roadside world alike with a shrewd and steely-eyed glare as they leave the village and the long road to it behind and turn out rumbling onto the highway. A few miles inland and south through pines and alongside cultivated fields of mango, orange, and lime, and bulldozed areas yet to be planted. A huge speaker in the front blasts soca down the aisle, the driver in his arrogance shutting himself off from the riders and subjecting them to his taste for volume. Reese and Barbara share a seat near the rear, she against the window and not looking out, but looking along the pane of the glass or at the back of the seat in front of them and not speaking either, so that she seems, even to him, to be someone he just happened to sit next to. She is febrile, weak from hunger, and cannot eat. Her feet scrape the gritty floor, and she would walk the aisle if she could. All these folks are strangers except Reese, and he keeps her pinned in her corner for her own good and holds her hot hand tightly in his. She has lost control of herself. She may piss or scream or pass out for good or explode in light, like being trapped inside yourself with voices and distant sights and unable to move out into the world beyond this dream of yourself, sitting with pains of the skin and stomach and this relentless internal heat, and without the energy to run or dance or fling oneself out of a horrible state. How can this be real? An illness, some say, but these tablets do nothing for her. A sickness of gaps, of missing spaces between waking dream and fitful sleep. An interior turnstile jammed between life and death that she stays within to keep from exiting the wrong way. Dear God, she keeps saying, I'm so young. Am I sleeping? Am I being born? Am I dying? Have I not represented myself decently? I love my family, my people, my stillborn baby too. I'm sorry. There's something wrong with my body, but I only want to better myself like anyone does. Heather, bless her soul, she speaks of specialists we cannot afford. Miami, New York, Boston, Vienna, Jesus, Abraham, Job, dear God, I'm going home like they tell me. Is it you? Is it me? My heart, it cannot be so hard to stay alive, so difficult to die. I have done nothing wrong. I don't deserve this foul treatment. Take them away, please. They make forays down bumpy coastal roads to encounter travelers waiting in seaside savanna places. Bless you. Villages made to stand between silk grass plains and clear green streams. Red Bank, Russell Creek, Bonefish Bay. In Southwater, Reese watches from the idling bus, the water falling like mercury blobs from a high tower pipe that overflows in spurts that drop tumbling down the air to burst in explosive sprays over the brown children squealing under there. He buys a cold soda through the window and offers it to Barbara. She shakes her head, and after they are moving again, he holds some coolness from the bottle in his palm and places it against her burning neck. She looks at him and rubs her forehead on his shoulder. At Monkey Branch, the driver stops for lunch, and most of the passengers get out too and stand in the shade of the place or relieve themselves or eat something. Reese buys a snapper sandwich, and takes some aspirin with an orange soda. And when he comes out, he walks along the bus looking in the windows for Barbara and jumps aboard to see if she's down on the seat, and then sees her at some distance down the dusty road. "What the hell," he says, running. And he catches up to her, takes her by the arm, and leads her around. She's pointing at her bare feet as they walk, and he says finally, "There's nothing wrong with your feet, Barb." The driver is back in his seat and the engine is running as they return. He gives Barbara a disapproving look and tells Reese, "I won't hang up my route for anybody." And Reese looks at his eyes a moment and leans toward the man as if he might answer or even strike the fellow, and then turns away and with all eyes on them follows his shuffling friend back to their seat. The highway is unpaved from here, and the old yellow bus rattles along at a speed meant to best negotiate the washboard ripples and a known pattern of potholes that make up this ochre track, driven through jungle terrain and alongside hacked-out Kekchi homesteads and over rushing waters in rock-made ravines. The sky clouds quickly, coming over the trees like a streaked gray drape, and the rain descends in a great wash whose cleansing sweep and mountainous origins could be smelled only moments before its arrival. Windows slide up all around. The driver presses ahead on a slippery ribbon of mud, and the only music now comes from sluicing tires and spattered steel and the metronomic squeaks of hard-working wipers. Just as suddenly the shower passes and the road is slick under a bright sun and fresh steam rises from rock and puddle and roof alike as they descend to the coast in the town of Rio Perez. Rounding a bend on a slope to the river and the open sea again bursting into view after a long absence, the water in a muddy torrent beneath them as they cross the bridge, and the demarcation at the mouth a cleanly drawn line, a stark division of colors, brown river, blue sea. On this wet afternoon, a simple and brilliant presentation of the world here in this southern district, with its buildings squat and gleaming, antennas shining, and in the near distance a light aircraft lifting in a silver glimmer against the dark green humps of a pair of hills alone at the outskirts. She carries her one small bag, and Reese has his fishing gear in his duffel, and they walk from the central plaza down to the waterfront in the empty market area and find no working boats present. This is not a market day, and there is no regular traffic to Moho Bight, and he knows they will have to find a fisherman or someone else to ferry them onward. From a vendor's cart, he buys bananas and peanuts, and they move down the road to the benches of a small park near a public outhouse built out over the water. A small girl soon approaches with a tray, and Reese buys a brick of Creole bread and sits eating in the sun, while Barbara stands nearby staring out to sea. There are a few cars and some pedestrians occasionally passing, and Indian women appear one at a time to stand before him silently with small white baskets and embroidered cloths, and Reese declines them one after the other. After a while, Barbara sits beside him, and he believes he sees in her gaze some lucidity, and he asks her if she's doing okay. At first she nods and then shakes her head, and he isn't able to tell if this is some little humor or simply the general confusion regarding her condition. He pats her leg, and what he asks her is what he's wanted to ask all day. "Why are you going back?" And she says almost immediately, as if she'd been talking all day, as if she'd just been about to explain herself, as if they were just two neighbors passing the time. "A man came to me." She covers her mouth and coughs hard with her head down, and when she looks up again, she stares beyond him at the sparkling horizon. "A man came to me. I do not believe in spirits. A man came to me, a man like you were sitting there. He was the older brother of my grandmother, my mother's mother. He was drowned fishing many years before, but he came to me and said to me, 'Little sister, what is it you are doing?' And he poked me with a stick here at my belly, and I tried to walk away, but I could not walk properly. My feet were swollen, and in the sand I could not move well. He continued to poke me, my belly, and then my back when I turned away. 'You are so thirsty,' he tells me. 'Why do you not drink? You can die of a thirst like that. Is it your wish to die?' This is while I'm in hospital. The night is glowing too bright, and I think it must be the street light outside, but only the black ocean is there. And in the glow, are people standing near this man, people in loincloths and holding bowls. And the man poked me again, and I say, stop it, they have drinks for us, take what they have. But he says, little sister, you must drink. We are both so thirsty. Take this cassava beer and drink too. I am too sick to drink is my reply, and so he hits my legs, and I fall to the sand screaming. The water pitcher is spilling on the floor, and the night nurse is very angry with me. And that was the time I began to know I was going home. Because I am not well. I do not believe in spirits, but they will not let me rest. They wish to harm me because I cannot help them. They are not well. Do you understand? I'm not well, but what I have told you is true. Do you understand? Yes, he says. When did you leave? How many years? She sighs, seemingly calm. 10, I think. How old are you? 26. She's looking at him. Yes, it was 10. Well, I'm sure they'll be glad to see you. To this, she has no answer. By 3 o'clock, they have moved to the shade behind the market building and sit on the steps there watching a lone dory coming in from the south. It's single occupant paddling, taking a long time in his approach, but angling toward the wharf before them. An old man in a dirty straw hat scooting into the shallow water along the sidewall of the concrete wharf. A few small fish at his feet, and the man standing in his craft now and squinting up at Reese, speaking above him. Afternoon, Reese says. We need to get to Moho today. The girl's sick. The man adjusts his hat. Hospital here, he says. She wants to get home, Reese says. The man cranes his neck upward, but cannot see her from his position. Wednesday, he says. We can't wait. We don't expect a free ride either. The man bends down and begins to string his fish. If I could get an engine, would you take us? No. Anybody else out there? Couple of fellas. They have motors? Believe so. Reese walks back and squats in front of Barbara, who has her face cupped in both hands, leaning forward. Listen, he says, this guy's no help. We passed the gas station on the way in. I'm going over there, and you either have to come with me or stay right here, okay? Stand up if you're coming. Tired, she says, her eyes half closed. Listen to me. He grips her wrist. I'll be right back, and I want to find you right here, okay? I'm going to find us a boat, and you have to stay with our things. You hear me? Barb, okay? Answer me. All right. He stands. Don't move. He runs down the waterfront street past restaurants and stores, a pool room, post office, police station, the office of the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries, and on around a bend to the site of the station, and then walks up behind it, catching his breath. The man inside is a businessman, and once he sees the money, he sends a boy running with his message and sits Reese down with a cool drink, and they wait. A radio is on with the commentary, and in the lull, he hears distinctly the public announcement. Cholera prevention is in your hands. Wash them. In 15 minutes, the boy returns and says the man with the boat will be at the wharf in three quarters of an hour. The run back pains his head. He rounds the corner of the building and startles a dog smelling his bag. The dog jerks sideways, and Reese panics at the missing person, racing to the end of the wharf to look in the water and then running back to the street and looking up and down and trying to get air in his lungs, leaning over with his hands on his knees and his head pounding. He goes into the building and finds her laid out on a table like a body awaiting an autopsy. The odor of old meat and fish and blood and marrow in the air and in the stone and in her hair. He bends over and places his head on her chest and feels her heart beating in concert with the blood in his head. He hears the humming flies and smells the rancid scraps and shuts his eyes as he holds her hand. Thank you. This would be the time where you could ask a question if you wanted to. Or not. It's not mandatory. All right. Yes.
Why dog head?
Well, that's the first story, which you didn't hear from. That's the name of the first story. So that's. Oh, you haven't read it yet. He said it. You haven't read it yet. So no, that's the name. There's 3 stories. That's the first story, and so that's just kind of to me symbolized what the book was about, kind of mythology and superstition and nature. Doghead is actually, it comes from what some islanders call a boa constrictor. In French, they call it tête chien, which means doghead, and so that was the inspiration for the book title. Yes? What?
Now you're flooded. You're flooded with questions.
Wow. Go ahead, Jeff.
Are you planning any more Central American trips?
Well, no. Well, I mean, I don't really know a lot of long range travel plans usually, but I'm working on a novel and it takes place in Costa Rica. I've been there twice, so I might be okay. I might have to go again. So maybe.
All right.
Yeah. All right. Artie.
Where was that location that you're writing about now?
That was taken from Belize too, yeah.
Please?
Yeah. It starts out with diving and the coast, and then they go in.
Got it.
Interior totally changes the geography. Yeah. That's 2 for him. Okay, go ahead.
Miami has a lot of features to that. I think that with your history here and your knowledge of this town, and
Features?
that you might, one day think about writing about our city.
Well, that's a good point. That's a good point. And, I'm thinking of a really, really comical thing called the Location Scout, maybe.
No one would believe it.
No one, exactly. That's why I've been delaying all this time. No one would believe it, really. So, yes?
Michael, were you able to get to any of the ruins when you were in Belize?
Yeah.
Tulum, places like that?
Yeah, I've been to maybe,
Or that's Mexico?
that's Mexico, but yeah, I did a trip where, I went to maybe 5 ruins or something one time. And I've been again, I think I went back to Tulum another time to see the difference in, it used to be a place you could just walk around with nobody, and now it's like flooded with tourists, Tulum, But no, I went to some of the big ones, Tikal, Palenque, and Chichen Itza, of course. And
Did those kind of help you in your writing, or?
yeah. I mean, I didn't know at the time I was going to write about that, but they're just cool places to visit, Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the Carib Indians and the West Africans that were together and what their
Yeah.
name is?
Yeah, the Garifuna.
Could you spell that, please?
Garifuna, Garifuna. Well, yeah, they originally they settled in. They were actually escaped slaves from West Africa. I think maybe some Central America that were they kind of began to commingle with the Carib Indians in like St. Vincent and Dominica, and were rather than being rejected, they were allowed to escape slavery and make their lives there, and they began to commingle on a few places, and the British called them black Caribs to distinguish them from other Caribs that were not mixed, and so but the British decided to get rid of them, and then like the 1790s, they just dropped them in Roatan in Honduras, and got rid of them from the Caribbean, and then they began to spread out into Nicaragua, Belize, Guatemala, along only coastal areas.
That's interesting. And
So they have a mix of African heritage and the ways they picked up from the Carib Indians. They still have their own language, their own culture.
Garifuna.
Garifuna, yeah.
And the language is similar to.
It's their own. It's mixed from African original words and also the Arawak and Carib languages from the Caribbean. Yeah. So
Thank
they,
you.
yeah. So I met some people and was able to attend a ceremony, and so that gave me the bones of this story.
Because Belize was originally British Honduras, British.
It was British Honduras. That's right. Yes, it's the only English-speaking country in Central America.
They practice voodoo?
Well, they I wouldn't call it voodoo, but they do. If you read the story, you'll see what they.
But many
It's-
slaves were Muslims, but these Muslims that are.
No, not at all. They do like an ancestor worship. They call ancestors together to solve problems, health problems, and other things once in a while, and it gathers the people together and from far-flung areas. It keeps the culture going.
Oh.
It's all in here. All the answers. All the answers.
Thank you, Michael. Folks, you're watching online, give us a call. You still have time to get a book autographed and for us to ship it to you. For those of you here, the books are for sale behind the counter. Michael will sit right over here and sign them. We got some food and some Prosecco back there for you. I just ask when you rise if you could fold your chairs, put them against the back so we could create some room in here. Let's get another round of applause for Michael. That was a great event. Thank you all so much for coming.